We're glad to have you back out here into the Sedona area, Randall. And, you know, the theme this year is the Holy Grail. And you touched on some ideas last year with the Grail mysteries, and we're going to go deeper this year because it's connected to some actual technology that's existing in our midst right now, which you're going to make a brief reveal and disclosure on. Could you give us some background of the origins of the Grail mystery and the Grail romances?
Sure. They actually go back into ancient times. It, a lot of them, the themes can be traced back to Celtic origins. Probably one of the strongest sources of Grail type literature or traditions. Traditions. I'll use the word traditions. We'll go back to the Celts and to the Welsh traditions in that area up in there. The Cauldron of Lugh, the Fisher King, things like that have very parallels in some of the early Celtic mythology. But we generally associate the Holy Grail in its current incarnation with the High Middle Ages. And this is a period between starting with the poem authored by Chrétien de Troyes that saw the light of day in 1180. It was a period of about 40 to 50 years during which the majority of the basic texts saw the light of day, were published, became available. And I guess I'd say at the core of the tradition, there's about, maybe 12 to 20 different things that were written in multiple languages, primarily French, but also Irish, Welsh, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Dutch, Italian. So there were Grail stories written down in all of these languages, but most of the tales that have come down to us were French, maybe with the exception of Wolfram von Eschenbach, who was German. But they all pretty much emerged during this period of incredible creative fertility that was associated with the High Gothic, the High Middle Ages. And this was the time during which the great cathedral building enterprise was launched and reached its peak. It was the time when the catheters came to prominence, when the Order of the Templars came to prominence, when the troubadours came to prominence, when the first schools of Kabbalah were established in Spain, when the Sufis rose to prominence, and there was a tremendous flowering of knowledge in the Middle East, in Islam, when the texts, many of the ancient texts in Greek and other languages were translated into French and German and English. That began during this period of time. The tarot cards, which is a tremendously potent repository of symbolism, saw the light of day. So it was a really interesting time. And the Grail romances were right in the middle, right as a part of that. And they continued. There was various offshoot writings that continued right up until the Renaissance. Probably the most famous is Thomas Mallory's version of the stories. And they're still finding their way into popular culture in modern times, the Grail in various forms. It's even become a figure of speech. If we're talking about, this is the Holy Grail of economics, or the Holy Grail of science is such and such discovery. But behind that, there is this tradition. And it's a very profoundly interesting, powerful, and potent tradition.
And so you said that it's in the modern times as well, and the influence of it. It's in the language, but do you see it anywhere other than just the language?
Well, certainly in popular culture, it's got a place. I don't think, there is, serious academic studies of it, but those are mostly looking at it as a strictly literary phenomenon. I don't think there's too many. Well, there are studies that are coming from the standpoint that it's part of an arcane or esoteric tradition. or even, you know, a mythic tradition, an occult tradition, if you will. Um, but they're obscure. There's not anything to my knowledge that is really out there widespread. There's some really great books and studies that have been done, you know, since I got interested in this stuff a number of decades ago. And you know, I'm certainly going to be talking about that at the conference. I'm going to try to give people the enough insight into the meaning of of the symbols that are so intrinsic to that tradition, that it'll give them some tools that they can then go from with on their own and research further if they want to learn more. And the thing about the various stories is they're really a very bewildering variety of approaches to the Grail and actually what it was, if it was anything physical. Um, or was it something merely spiritual? Or was it something merely symbolical? There's a number of ways that it's been approached, you know, the Jungian fashion of it being representing psychological archetypes. Um, but I think that there's a little bit of all of that. Um, Let me sum up what in a few simple words, what I think the Grail really was. I think the Grail, I mean, the the image that we always get for those people who are kind of familiar with the Grail, is that of a cup or chalice. That's the most well known, but it has many different incarnations in many different forms. The Grail, in a sense, is like a shape shifting entity. And when you go through the multiple different Grail romances, as they're called, you kind of begin to get that sense of how the Grail is transforming through these different through the different tales that have come out and the stories that have been authored or you know, created around this image as a central unifying theme. Really, if we were going to trace the strands of the origins, we would find that it's really from many areas, many times, many lands. India certainly has contributed. You know, the Middle East, the Greek traditions have a lot of influence on the shape and form of the Grail as it emerged during those Middle Ages. Egyptian, of course, and there and because in many different manifestations of the Grail literature, we see it described alternately as many different things. You know, it could be the eye of the Egyptian god Tehot, or it could be a stone that falls from heaven, as Wolfram von Eschenbach describes it. In some cases, it might be a symbol of procreation. In other traditions, it might actually indicate blood. In other traditions, it's represented as a decapitated head. So the average reader, without a context of understanding of symbolism, could have a difficult time grappling with the varied ways that the Grail has been represented in these stories. What I'm trying to do, though, is to show that these are all different components of one system. I even use the word a machine or a technology that have to be integrated as a whole. And I got this great quote by one of the modern Grail scholars, John Michel, who really was the person, it was his writings, I think, that most inspired me to dive deep into the Grail tradition. Here's one quote by him. Yes, this is from the book 12 Tribe Nations and the Science of Enchanting the Landscape, written by John Michel and Christine Rohn. The legend of the Grail is the Celtic version, with particular application to Britain, of a universal theme concerning something which has vanished and must be found or invoked again for the redemption of life on earth. That really encapsulated what I think is the the inner meaning of the Grail tradition. I look at it this way. I think it's represents a great secret, which is laying hidden now for almost 800 years. Now it's time for the Grail to reveal itself, for the redemption of life on Earth. And I hope that we can do a little bit of that, peeling back the veil, to pierce the veil a little bit and see what's been hiding behind the veil. That we can pierce the veil, as did Percival, who was one of the knights that found the Grail after being led to the mysterious Castle Corbenic, where he saw the Grail pageant displayed for the first time in many, many, many years. So we'll look into all of that and talk about the stories, and then we'll talk about what I think is some of the unifying themes of these varied stories, these and the richness of these stories and the diversity of these stories, but to try to show the themes that tie these stories together, and then to put forth the hypothesis that the Grail tradition is about a lost technology for restoring the earth, healing the human species, and accelerating the evolution of life on this earth. Yeah, and in that light, this quote from Wolfram, his work Parzival, is appropriate. It is well known to me that many brave knights dwell with the Grail at Montsalvache. Always when they ride out, as they often do, it is to seek adventure. They do this for their sins, these Templars, whether their reward be defeat or victory. A valiant host lives there, and I will tell you how they are sustained. They live from a stone of the purest essence. It is called lapis exilis. By the power of this stone, the phoenix is burned to ashes, but from the ashes she is reborn. Thus does the phoenix molt and change her plumage, which afterwards is as bright and shining and lovely as before. This stone confers such powers on mortal men, so that their flesh and bones are made young again. The stone is called the Grail, and it is unknown save to those who are singled out by name to join the company of the Montsalvache.
Quest has been going on for many centuries now.
Yes, and what we are going to do is we are going to pose questions. And questions, posing the right questions, is the key to successfully completing the quest.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Randall. Was there
My
anything
pleasure,
else
Robert. No, I think we'll save it for the conference.
Yeah, and we'll touch in again and do some other shorts to keep people intrigued and invited to join us. So we'll be touching base again. And thank you all for tuning in to this message, and we hope to see you there in April.